Welcome everybody. We'll kick off Agnes's People Policy Place, I can never quite say it properly, seminar now. My name is Andrew Taylor. I work at the Northern Institute for a Demography and Growth Planning Research team, and a lot of my colleagues are here. And we're very excited to be hosting Agnes, who's come all the way from Hungary, from the Geographical Institute there, which is part of the Academy of Sciences, with whom we've had, with the Geographical Institute, we've had an 8-year sort of relationship where we've been writing papers, having people come over, used to be temporarily and now permanently to work with us, and writing a book which we've just submitted together. So Agnes is here for a few weeks to embed herself and immerse herself in Northern Australia, and I'm exceedingly happy that you're doing this seminar. This is the biggest crowd that we've had, I think, in history, so that says something about your topic, I'm sure. Before we kick off, I'd like to, on behalf of Agnes, recognise the Larrakia people and their cultures and their elders, past, present, future, and pay respects to them and their country. So I'm sure you've all seen the topic of today's talk. I won't try and explain it because I'm going to leave that to Agnes, and then we'll have some questions after Agnes's talk, which I think will be about 25 minutes or so. So welcome, Agnes, to the Northern Institute, and thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Andrew. And I'm very, very pleased to finally set foot in Australia, which was my long-time dream since the age of 14. So I'm already feel honored. And this is, that double pleasure to share, to have the possibility to share my PhD, one part of my PhD project with you today. So what I would like to do today is to invite you to a journey to a very distant place, to my region. Trust me, it's super distant. I just flew, I don't know, 40 hours straight. So what I would like to offer you today is just a part of my PhD, which was discussing two cities with different ethnic feature. And today we will talk about only one city called Oradea. And why would it be interesting, this city? Let me show you this photo. At least one thing, I guess it's quite striking, that half of this building is painted nicely, fresh white, while the other half is in a rather neglected condition. This is the city, Oradea City Philharmony building. So this is where the local Philharmony practice. And the white and brand new part of the building is used by the Romanian musicians, while the neglected one belongs to the Hungarian musicians. So this might suggest some kind of not so harmonious relationship between these two communities. And also it might be interesting to know a little bit more about the power positions of these two groups. So where we are, this is Hungary, and this is Romania, and Oradea is only like 5 kilometers from the border. For 1,000 years, it belonged to Hungary, and it only became part of Romania after the First World War, so in the beginning of the 20th century. This figure shows you the ethnic composition of Oradea. As you can see, at the end of the 19th century, almost completely it was inhabited by ethnic Hungarians, and it's very important, among these ethnic Hungarians there was almost 30% Jewish who were most of them Hungarian speakers. So we had the Hungarian majority, absolute majority, and after the 1970s there was a shift, and since the 1970s Romanians are the majority, and the proportion of Hungarians dropped to about 25%. So during less than 100 years, the ethnic composition of the population has shifted. And Hungarians were primarily the absolute majority, became minority in the city, which traditionally belonged to Hungary. This is how it looks like. And this photo was taken from the tower of the city hall. What you can see here, 3 churches. This one is the local Roman Catholic Church, which is visited by the Hungarian population. And you have here these other 2, which belongs to the Greek Catholic and the Orthodox Church. Both are visited by the Romanians. As you can see, they are pretty much in the same style, which suggests that these communities have been living here for centuries together. However, Hungarians were the majority. There were also Romanians, and actually Oradea used to be famous for the so-called peaceful coexistence of different religions, different nationalities, different ethnicities, and different religions. So this is very important that in Hungary, Oradea had traditionally this kind of image, that this is a city where many different ethnicities, different religions, different languages mix, and people still don't fight. And these are just some photos. This is the 2 synagogues, and this is the view to the town hall. As you can see, this will be very important in the second part of my talk, that the city has a very rich built heritage. These buildings are the masterpieces of the so-called Art Nouveau or secessionist architectural style. And these are famous not only in Romania or in Hungarian context, but in Europe as well. So what I would like to offer you today is first just brief few sentences about the theory, and then we will focus on the street name changes and the conflict appeared around the street names. And later we will talk about how the local communities, local politicians try to mitigate this conflict and try to come up with some kind of plan how to live together. And actually my aim with this presentation is to point to the importance of local in case of symbolic landscape. So in many cases we are dealing with the national level. What is happening on national level? And often we just overlook what is happening on local level. However, on local level, different dynamics might appear. Okay, so briefly about the theory. As Lefebvre said, urban place can be perceived as an arena or a place for representation where various groups might interfere with each other. And in this context, the visibility in public space has its power. So for many groups, to be visible in public space, it means that they are powerful, or not only being visible, but also erasing the other or making the other invisible in public space. So often there is a struggle between different groups who are most of the time in different power positions. Not surprisingly, this is absolutely embedded in political circumstances. So, for instance, in our region, in Central Eastern Europe during the 20th century. There were many, at least 3, 4, 5, it depends which part, which country are you talking about. There were many political transformations, each were followed by major transformations in the symbolic landscape, namely the street names were changed, statues were demolished, new statues were erected, all these things. So altogether, in these elements of symbolic space, we can track the regime changes, the changes in ideology. And here I would like to quote Maoz Azariahu, who wrote a fantastic article about the power of commemorative street names. And he says that actually the power of street names is that they conflate history and geography and merge the past they commemorate into ordinary settings of human life. And this will be very important because actually that's why I believe that the local level worth exploring, because just think about that when there is a street name change, for instance, you have to ask for a new ID or new passport or new whatever, so new documents, so it really affects your everyday life. Not to mention that by using street names, you just repeat the power's narrative who gave the name to that very street. And you must use the street names because the street names give orientation for us in space. And my other point is that often in one place there are more identities, and among these groups there's a contestation about the different narratives about the space, which might result in alternative or guerrilla actions. And the visibility has different importance and meaning for the majority and the minority. In this sense, in this specific case, I will talk about ethnic majority and ethnic minority. But I would like to point out that this can be any kind of majority or minority, like bicycle or people who are driving the car. You know, you see my point that this is something which can be universal. In my case, this is about ethnic majority and ethnic minority. For the majority, the visibility in the urban space, in the public space, means that they have authority over the territory, while for the minority, in many cases, this is the only proof of their existence. For instance, if there is a street name or if there are bilingual street name plates, that's a proof that there's another group as well, another language as well in that area. And finally, I also would like to quote here the importance of local identity, because as we will see, this kind of contestation over the place, who owns the place, the importance of local identity is also coming up, as there are local stories and legends, for instance, around why one street is named like that. And these local stories create links to the locality, and this might help us to feel at home in certain places. And then here comes the question that which story will be represented in the public space? Whose story will be represented and how it will be represented? And this is when the politics will enter the field. Okay, and now I would like to show you some maps about the city. What I did is that I collected maps from different periods of the city, and I made a database about the street names. And in these maps, what you can see is that with yellow, I marked those streets which meaning is ethnically neutral. So, for instance, Church Street is yellow, or those which doesn't belong either the Hungarian or the Romanian community. As you can see, in the middle of the 19th century, except 2-3 street names, everything was neutral. So the national or ethnic content, it was basically missing from the landscape. However, during the turn of the century, when the city belonged to Hungary, you can see that here in the center, this is the city center, the major squares were renamed after some Hungarian figures, mainly politicians. So you can see that this kind of ethnic national content is already infiltrated the city, the symbolic landscape of the city. And then the First World War happened when the city was taken by Romanian army, and this quotation is from a local newspaper. It says that, following Sibiu and Brașov, these are two other cities. Now the City Council of Cluj also initiated to change the Hungarian-related street names, commemorating Hungarian local and national nobilities with Romanian ones. Romanians are optimistically argue that there are enough names in the Romanian history to replace Hungarian-related street names. So you see, politics has arrived, and this is what happened. So it's a big change. Just look at the colors. This is before the First World War, and with the purple I marked the Romanian relevant street names. So I would say this was a very successful symbolic appropriation. And this is from 1952, when for a few years the city was regained back by Hungary. So once again, another regime change. As you can see, once again it's rather green, so Hungarian. And this is from 1980, during the last days of the, or closer to the last days of the communism. And as you can see, basically there are 2 or 3 Hungarian or green street names, and there are very big purple places in the whole map. So I would say this is a very rapidly shifting and often changing symbolic scape that we can see. And this map is from 2006, and you can see basically 5, 6, 7 Hungarian street names, these green ones. But what is important is that the center of the city is completely purple, and only very few tiny streets recognizing the Hungarian population or reminding us to the Hungarian history of the city. And this was the point when around 2007 the local Hungarian politicians, of course they were also following their own agenda, they started to raise voices that they also would like if there were more Hungarian-related street names in the cityscape, and they refer to this law in Romania, which says that if the ratio of the minority in the settlement is above 20% in the local population, the members of the minority group has the right to use their mother tongue in official administration. See, it's not about that it's compulsory to have bilingual street names, but it states that if the minority is beyond 20%, they have the right to use their mother tongue. And this was the legal argumentation. They started to build the campaign. And they were demanding 3 things. First, to have bilingual street name plates. Second, to gain representation of Hungarian history, Hungarian figures in street names, at least in the proportion of the ethnic Hungarians. So let's say that 75% of street names supposed to be Romanian related and 25% Hungarian related. That's the proportion between the ethnic groups. And finally, they had some special requests to restore the names of particular streets, which were, in their opinion, especially important and symbolically the most precious for the Hungarian community. Why? There is this street. It's narrow, tiny, not in the best shape, and this street, and it's quite far from the city center. This street was renamed as Saint Ladislaus, who was the king, Hungarian king, who established the city around 1000. And previously, the main square from where we had the photo at the beginning with the three churches, it was named, historically, it was always called Saint Ladislaus Square. And now this is the Saint Ladislaus Street. So this, for the local Hungarian community, this was especially painful. That definitely this cannot be happen. So, and but of course nothing actually happened. So they raised their voices, there were some petitions, but nothing happened. So what happened actually is that some activists during the night started to spray some old Hungarian names on private, this is important, private buildings whose owner previously agreed to do this. So these were only private buildings, not public buildings. So the owner of the houses agreed, okay, you can have it here. And then next day, other activists came and they just demolished it. And this was keep happening. And let me show you some photos, because there were very sophisticated methods how to demolish, how to damage the visibility of these unofficial signs with scratching or overpainting. And this was happening for weeks, months. And of course, there were more intense fights half a year before elections. But importantly, nothing really happened. There were some plans that, for instance, this is a street name from a different city. It's also in Romania. And in this city, where people were also, Hungarians were also demanding bilingual street name plates, but the Romanian majority said no. And this was the peace agreement, that this is the street name, and this is Strada for street in Romanian, and this is Utca for the street in Hungarian. So, very smart. They can say that this is bilingual. So this was the agreement. And of course, in Oradea, the Hungarian politicians said no to this solution, because for them this is not a solution. And there were some actions. These are local Hungarian politicians. For instance, this one, this is the building of the city house, and he just fixed here the St. Ladislaus Square homemade street name plate. Or this one, this is fascinating, because this is just a sticker with the Hungarian and Romanian name of the local river. And if you go there, I mean, yeah, one day it's there, other day it's torn down. And next day somebody comes, once again it's fixed, and this keeps happening. And I made an interview in 2013 with one Hungarian member of the local Council. And he said that actually since 2012 there is a gentleman's deal among the members of the town council, and according to this gentleman's deal, gentleman's agreement, the street names in the city center remains intact, but the newly opening streets, so those streets which are opening in the suburbs or in the urban sprawl area, in those cases, they will follow the ethnic proportion. So in these newly opening streets, 75% of the, so if 10 streets opening, 7 will have Romanian name, 3 will have Hungarian name. But, of course, those Hungarians who are related to the national Hungarian history, so like kings, prime ministers, those are out of question. And the other part of the deal is that these names, which are suggested by the Hungarian community, should be persons with local relevance. So like local teachers, local doctors, because they are perceived by the Romanians as less risky. Because they will not recall that direct reference to the Hungarian national history. And this was the point when my interviewee pointed out that, yes, since Oradea was a Hungarian city for such a long time, for us Hungarians, it's not a problem to compile a long list of figures with local relevance and importance. On the other hand, for the Romanians, and he didn't finish the sentence. So, actually, what happened is that the Hungarian community started to organize, for instance, the school kids. They started to organize these competitions for school kids to try to dig up the local history, ask your grandparents, who is the famous in your street, who was famous, I don't know, 100 years ago. So eventually, this local deal, which was supposed to, settle this whole situation, and actually it was a compromise, but on the other hand, it reinforced and it empowered the Hungarian community, at least those who are interested in their own history. So we ended up in a situation when, as a counter effect, in a way, the local heritage of the Hungarian minority was reinvented because of this compromise. And very interestingly, it's not only happened in the Hungarian minority, but also, and this is very interesting, in the last couple of years, if we open local policy documents, planning documents about how to develop the city, we will find such sentences which previously, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, were absolutely impossible. Namely, that preservation of local heritage. This was something, local heritage, it was something which belonged to the Hungarian past of the city, all those buildings which we could see in the photos. Those were built by Hungarians or the very wealthy Jewish people, Hungarian-speaking Jewish people. So many of them were in very neglected condition because of this, because those were clear reminders to the Hungarian past of the city. But then capitalism came, and tourism brings money. And in the local council, they just started to count that actually we are only 5 kilometers from the Hungarian border. 99% of the tourists arriving from Hungary. So it means that if we serve them, they will come and spend money here. So why not? So eventually we ended up there that even in the planning documents, we could see now that, for instance, that the identity of Oradea as a city today is heavily influenced by the architectural style that was used in the beginning of the 20th century. So they don't say that during the Hungarian period, but in the beginning of the 20th century. This is already something. Or the diverse ethnical and religious identities that have lived in Oradea created a common heritage that is very much reminiscent of Central Europe. This is something that rather new phenomenon, because previously the narrative was that this city was, before Hungarians arrived, it was a Romanian, inhabited by Romanians, and then the Hungarians came, that they captured, whatever. So there was this constant fight between who owns the city. And now you can see that even in the official documents, this is a much different tone, which is open for discussion, and openly say that this is a diverse ethnical and religious. This is a city with diverse ethnical and religious identities. And just to show you some photos, because this is in the level of policy documents, boring, but if you visit the city, you can see now these statues. You know, these are very popular with tourists, because you can sit there and take a photo, whatever. But this statue with the four figures, this was standing inside a museum, which was only one house. It was a coffee house, historically, where one of the most famous Hungarian poets, he was sitting there. And that house museum, that small museum, it was very precious for the Hungarian community, but it was, you know, it was just a house museum, nothing else. So you enter one room, and there was this statue, and that's it. And now you can see that it's outside, in a square. How could it happen? Once again, it's a local deal between the Hungarian and Romanian politicians. What happened is that the Hungarians wanted this statue to be out, to be visible in the public space. So the deal was that, okay, you can have your statue with the poets outside, but the Romanians wanted the statue of the Queen of Romania in front of the local theater. She was standing here after the First World War. She was the wife of the Romanian king who was reigning after the First World War. So yes, this was the deal, that okay, the Hungarians can have their statue in the square, but the Romanians wanted this statue once again, because this was demolished, so it needed to be resculptured. So this is the deal. So this is how, these are the strategies how they would like to secure visibility both for the majority and the minority. So to conclude, my point was during this presentation is to show you that the rivalry of street names and monuments actually contribute to the ethnicization of public space, because very few content was missing ethnicity, and everything was about ethnicity at certain point. But I also wanted to call your attention that the local history and the local figures are important, because in many cases in this absolutely intense nation-based discourse, the local figures can be much more acceptable both for the majority and both for the minority. It seems that it's easier to agree on those people who are only locally relevant than having the national figures in the public space. And finally, I found it very interesting that during the years, I started my fieldwork in Oradea in 2007, and when I finished in 2015, we ended up in a completely different place. So from in 2007, then there was these guerrilla actions. In 2015, there were these tourism development plans that, yes, we are an ethnically diverse city. So you see that in 7-8 years, many things can change. But of course, I'm not so naive, so I also would like to point here to the importance of capital and money, which is in tourism, for instance, in this case, which was really an effective tool and impacted local politicians to try to come up with some plan. And of course, I would be very happy to say that this might be, to develop multi-ethnicity, to embrace multi-ethnicity, to embrace diversity, can be a tool how to mitigate ethnic conflict or religious conflicts. I don't know, we'll see. But at least in Oradea, it had some successes. Thank you very much.